Hello, my name is John Sayer, Technical Marketing Manager, Civil Infrastructure here at Autodesk. Today I would like to talk about a workflow for road rehab. This is the second of 3 videos that will take you through how to navigate this workflow. This is step 2 of 3, linear feature extraction in InfraWorks. When we left off in the last video, we were here in Rehab Pro, we'd saved our RCP and we were ready to start working in InfraWorks. So I'm going to go ahead and select my home button, and then I can just minimize my Rehab Pro here. And what I want to do is I want to start you from scratch here, like this is a new project. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create the model in Model Builder. Now, if I go to Model Builder and I start to look at it here, I've got several different ways that I can load my project by location. So I can draw a rectangle for the AOI, I can draw a polygon for the AOI, or I can import a polygon to select an AOI, which is what I want to do because I've got a boundary that was created in a shapefile format that I can just import. All right, and it goes straight to where this data set resides. So I'm going to go ahead and select that, and we're going to scroll out here to the correct location. And you can see I've got a boundary folder, and I'm going to select 2 files. I'm going to select the PRJ and the shape and hit open. And it zooms to my location. All right, so now all I have to do is just name it. I'm going to put it in the correct group here. I'm just going to use my default group, and we'll call this Road Rehab for Videos. And hit Create Model. Now again, that's going out to the cloud, and it's going to pull all of the information in, like roads and our terrain surfaces, Bing imagery, things of that nature, very quickly. So you will receive an email saying that your model's been created, and you'll be able to see it here in the opening screen of InfraWorks. So I'm going to go ahead and select it and get it to downloading. Once it's downloaded onto your local machine, then you'll be able to start working here in InfraWorks. So you can see here that the model comes in, and we can start to look at things. So we can see our roads, we can see our terrain, we can see our imagery. So the very next thing that we need to do is just start with that point cloud. So we're going to bring that point cloud in. All right, so I'm going to bring that up here in my Windows Explorer, and I'll just drag that over. I'll drag it and drop it in, and you'll be able to see it pretty quickly here. A couple of things that you need to notice and be wary of is this coordinate system. This needs to read the same as it did in Recap whenever we created the point cloud. So you can see here AL83WF is the coordinate system, so we're good to go. If this reads differently, you need to go back to Recap and retrace your steps on why that might have happened. So just hit close and refresh, and this will come up pretty quick. And now, once we have the point cloud inside of InfraWorks, you can see that it's kind of underneath a lot of things. Okay, so we can go through and we can delete these streets. All right, we can delete, whatever we don't want to see. Very quickly, you can still see it's still underneath the surface from the InfraWorks model. So what we need to do in our next step in this process, and before we can even do linear feature extraction, we need to go here in InfraWorks and we need to create point cloud terrain. All right. What this is going to do is this is going to classify the point cloud. Okay. So it reads the point cloud information that we brought in. I'm going to leave everything default. You could drill down into these processing rules and change them around, but for this demonstration, we're going to leave everything default, and it works very, very good. Here in the results options, one thing I wanted to point out is that this is going to create a bare earth topo. So the bare earth topo, we might want an RCS file of just that topo. So this will actually export the processed file. So we could tell it right here that we'd like to have only ground points, and it will process and dump out an RCS file that is nothing but the ground points from this particular point cloud. I could select where I wanted to save the file. All right, and in this particular instance, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to not export, but I go ahead and hit start processing. Now, I'm not going to process this right now because this does take just a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into a different model that's got this point cloud already processed. All right, so now that we're back to the main screen here, I can pop over and select Road Model Test, and you can see that we have the exact same point cloud inside of InfraWorks, but there's one thing that we've added, and that is the point cloud terrain, which is the bare earth topo. So I can zoom in here and start to take a look at this cloud, and you can see it's a little bit hard to see. All right, so a couple things we need to do before we start pulling linear features is, number one, we need to theme this cloud. So if I go up here into point cloud themes, you can see I've already got some generated. It's very easy to generate a point cloud theme. You just hit the plus sign. We've got some analysis types that we can do. We can do elevation, normal, single color, classification. Classification and intensity are the ones that we're going to use today. All right. Now, I'm going to go ahead and just turn on my classification, and you can see I can really see what is going on with this cloud. So I can see the lane on the left, I can see the stripes, I can see the lanes on the outside, which it works very, very well and is easy to see. So I'm going to zoom back here to the beginning. Actually, I'm going to move forward just a little bit here, and we're going to go ahead and start talking about linear feature extraction. So once I've got my cloud classified, or my point cloud theme shown, which is classification, I'm going to go ahead and shut that off, and I'll go over here and we'll select linear feature extraction. So the idea and the reason that we're doing this, all right, is because I want to pull this line work from this particular point cloud and represent that in Civil 3D so that we can target these lines for the paint stripes and lanes inside the road rehab corridor. All right, so the other thing that I'm going to do is I'm also going to pull transverse features. This is going to allow me to actually create points along what would be the same thing as like a cross section inside of Civil 3D, and it'll bring in that data to generate a surface which is going to be much, much lighter and still just as good as what we're using here for the point cloud, but it's just a lot lighter information. I'm going to zoom in, and we'll go ahead and start off with the linear feature extraction. So I'll go ahead and select linear feature extraction, and we'll pick the automatic method. And we'll go ahead and build a line here in this area for this first paint stripe. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and select here. Since we're going to work with this paint stripe first, I'm going to go ahead and select here, and I'll just move up that paint stripe, and I will double click. Now it's going to generate a linear feature along that paint stripe so that we have a piece of line work that we can use. Now what it's doing is that linear feature is going to have elevations along that point cloud at the vertexes of the linear feature itself. Now, one little thing that we can talk about while we're waiting on this to process is sometimes the point cloud, it'll start to draw a linear feature and it may stop right up here. It may run out of information. Don't let that bother you. Just move forward, all right? Say it stopped right here. You can see it didn't, but say it did. We could, if it stopped right at this location, we would just go back to linear feature extraction and run the command again and move from the endpoint on forward, and it would go ahead and pick the rest of it up. All right, so you can see that it did create that linear feature very well. All right, and we could go ahead and do the same thing on the next stripe. All right, so I'll hit escape, and I'll just go back up and create another linear feature automatically. We'll pick that stripe, and we'll move down here, double click, and it will create the linear feature for that particular paint stripe. So it created that one. All right, and now what we can do, we could continue on for the sake of time here. If we could build one linear feature, we can build 100. I do want to build another one though that shows this barrier here. You can see if I pan over, you can see that there's a barrier, a concrete barrier between both sides of the highway. So I'm going to create a linear feature along that particular barrier. So I'm just going to select linear feature extraction and hit automatic, and we'll just pick and start a line here, and we'll move up and double click here. Now the question is where on that barrier did I actually select? Well, once it generates this linear feature, we're going to go into a cross-section view, and we're going to be able to move that point around so that it is as close as we can get it on top of that barrier. All right, it's got that built. We'll go ahead and hit escape. And now I'm going to go into the cross-section view and just take a look at where it laid that line. So I could select any of these features and run this cross-section analysis, but I'm just going to select the top of that wall, right, that linear feature that it generated. I'm going to right-click and go to Show Cross-Section View. Now, a couple things. In this cross-section view, we can change the settings, all right? So we'll just go through those real quick. We can change the thickness. So if you look here at the cross-section view itself, if I zoom in, I could change this to 0.5, and it doesn't show as much information thickness wise, so you're not seeing as much of the cloud. So we can just change this thickness to be whatever we want so we can see visually what we want to see. So I'm just going to say it's a 2-foot thickness. We can see that really well, but it's still kind of dark. So I'm going to change the intense or the point cloud theme here to elevation. Now that gives me a good view of how that road lays. So it's reading that cloud and showing me the information on that cloud very nicely. So I can zoom up here and I can see well, let's talk about real quick what you're seeing. This yellow circle here, it coordinates here with a paint stripe. It shows you it's a paint stripe style. So there's a paint stripe that we added, a paint stripe that we added, and then I just use the same style, and that's fine for this particular instance. And this is what we wanted to represent as the top of our barrier. So I could zoom in and I can physically grab that and move it to the location that I want. Now what does that do to us? All right, so I'm going to spin this over and around a little bit and move things so you can see a little better. And we're going to go to the next station. All right, now you can see here, you can see it in plan view. It's pinned here at the top, at the back where we just set it. We move forward, it's down in the wall a little bit, and we can really see that if we zoom in here in the cross-section view. So I'm going to grab that point again, and I'm going to move it to the top of the wall. All right, and you're going to see that linear feature move up. All right, so it's going to pull elevations from the correct point on that barrier. We would simply just travel down that line and move that to where we needed it to be. So I mean, it's pretty tight here, so I could move it back over. You can zoom in pretty close, and it would pull it back over. We can move any of these lines or any of these features that we just pulled from the cloud. We can move them here inside the cross-section view if they're shown. All right. So we could go back and we could add another, have it pull another linear feature. And let's just do that real quick so you can see what I'm talking about. Okay, I could go back here and say I wanted a line to represent the barrier bottom. All right. So I can go back to linear feature extraction. Say I want to do one automatic and just pick along that same barrier and let it pull another linear feature from that barrier. Then what we'll do is go back into the cross-section view and we'll move that down to the bottom of the barrier to where it needs to be. Now this may seem a little bit time consuming, but it's much faster and much easier, and you get a much more accurate feature by doing it this way, because you can physically place that feature line, that linear feature, on the barrier where you want it to be, and it locates it very nicely. So it generated us another line, but we can't really see it very well right there, and it looks to be closer to the top. So let's just grab that outside barrier line that we generated before. Let's go to our cross-section view again, and I can see here, if I zoom in, I can see that I now have another feature line or another point that I'm working with. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get back here and I'm going to grab that particular linear feature and I'm going to pull it down to the bottom of the barrier wall, and you'll see it drop. Okay, and it looks like it drops below this surface, and you can be assured that it is hitting on the actual point cloud itself. It just may, that part of the surface may actually be a little bit lower than what you're seeing here. So I can go ahead and step through to the next spot. All right, and we'll pan forward a little bit, and I'll grab that and move it to the bottom of the wall. And it'll move that linear feature. If you see here, it moved it down. I can go to the next point. Same thing, I could grab it and move it down. And we could continue to do this so that we would accurately represent our barrier at the top and at the bottom. So we have several more linear features I'd like to pull, and I've already got those in another proposal. But there's one last thing I want to show you before we jump to that proposal, and that is just that I can create the transverse features. All right, so let me select one of these. Actually, I'm going to select the feature that I want to use as my center line. So I'm going to grab that, and I'm going to tell it that I'm going to right click and tell it I want to generate transverse lines. This is like setting up cross sections in Civil 3D. So my line length, I'm going to move that out to 70 feet. All right, my distance between lines, this is like a sampling increment, so it's 25 feet between lines, and I'm going to leave this distance between vertices a half a foot. This is how it's going to set points along that transverse line. It's going to set it every half a foot, pulling the elevation from this point cloud. So I could hit OK, and my transverse lines would come in. All right, let's go ahead and jump to that proposal and take a look at the finished product. So you can see that I've got a feature line here at the edge of pavement on the right. I've got the painted stripes, and I've got my transverse features. That's what these lines are here. So last thing before I start to export this information to Civil so I can bring it into Civil 3D is I want to name these features what they are. All right, so if I select one of the features and double click on it, I can see here that it adds and builds a feature code for that particular feature. Okay, well that's the pavement edge, so I want to give it a code of EOP1 so that I can recognize what that is in Civil 3D. It's very easy to understand what that is. The way that we'll be able to see that is when we export this out, it's going to export as a shape with object data. So we can bring that in to Civil 3D and read that object data straight from that line. So we'll make sure that's edge of pavement 1. We'll make sure that this is paint stripe 1. All right. And I'll go ahead and pan. I can select the next one. It's PS2. Select the next paint stripe. It's PS3. And we'll pick the outside edge. And that's edge of pavement 2. So we're good to go. At this point, we are ready to export out the information and start to bring it into Civil 3D. And this is the last step that we'll take here inside of InfraWorks. So we're basically done. InfraWorks has done the heavy lifting for our feature lines off this point cloud. So I'm going to go over and I'm going to select Export Point Cloud Extraction. Right. So a couple of things here. It's going to export a ground grid point only point cloud, so another RCS file for us. We want to be sure that, you can leave that selected. If you want another point cloud to be pushed out, this is going to be a much lighter point cloud than what you're seeing here. It's also going to export the linear features, the transverse vertices, and the vertical features. So we didn't extract any vertical features, so it won't bring anything out for that. But we do want the linear features and we do want the transverse vertices. It's going to export them in shapefile format for the linear features and a CSV file for the transverse vertices. So it's like a point file that we can bring in and create a surface from in Civil 3D. So those are already selected. The target coordinate system, be sure that you set this target coordinate system to your coordinate system you've been using, okay? If you don't, they will not come in correctly in Civil 3D. Then go to your save folder and we would just hit start export. Now I've already exported this out and you could take a look here and see that this is the information that it gives you. It gives you your grid points RCS, which I talked about, the lightweight point cloud. We have our linear features, which are given to us in shapefile format, and then we have the transverse points in a CSV format. So now we're ready to go ahead and jump into Civil 3D and start to work with the Rehab corridor. I hope that the information in this video has helped you to understand this step of the workflow I've been describing. Please look for the additional videos that take you to the next step. Have a great day.